Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach Podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach Podcast. Today, I get the pleasure of introducing you all to Ben Hjelle. I met Ben when he was a patient at Cognitive FX, and he is a Midwestern mutt. He's 40 years old, married with two sons who are 7 and 4. His career has been an interesting ride. It looks like he's done a UN fellowship, worked in the corporate world, has been a high school teacher and coach and an entrepreneur, and he has lived in Puerto Rico for the last 2 years and has co-founded a family consulting firm. So thank you so much for being here, Ben. I'm so excited for you to share your story today.
Thank you, Bethany, not only for this opportunity, but also everything you do for our community of people who are working through this enjoyable, crazy adventure of PCS and associated things. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a crazy adventure. So I'm actually really interested in hearing more about your background here. It's an interesting bio. So tell us a little bit, more about where you're from, what brought you on the path to where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a Midwestern mutt. So shout out to anybody listening who's from the Midwest. Started out in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'll end up there in a minute, but grew up in the outside of Chicago and then moved down to St. Louis for high school. And then, went to undergrad at University of Wisconsin, go Badgers, played lacrosse there, club lacrosse. That was a lot of fun. And then, been bouncing around doing different things, jumping in and out, like you said, of corporate world, following passions in teaching and working with kids, and then eventually back into more entrepreneurial work.
That's so cool. So, and did you you went back to, well, actually, we'll talk about Madison again, probably through your story here. So what brought you to Puerto Rico and tell me what a family consulting firm is.
Yeah. We came to Puerto Rico for a number of reasons. I think one of them was I personally love to be warm. So the joke that we have, my wife and I, is that we're kind of, if we were Disney princesses, she would be Elsa from Frozen because she really likes skiing and being up north, and I'm more like Moana. I could be happy skipping in the sand all day. So that's kind of number one reason. I think we spent part of the first COVID winter up in Michigan with family, kind of hanging out. And I just said to myself, you know what? I am ready to go back to someplace just a little bit warmer. So that's the first thing. Second thing, with our kids, we're 7 and 4 years old. We really wanted to raise them kind of outside of our home culture for a little bit, just to plant some seeds, I guess, of new perspectives. I think another thing is that we're a transracial adoptive family. So I'm the white adoptive parent of Black boys. And I think there was an interest in helping them cultivate their ethnic identity, maybe in a place where a lot of families, especially here in Puerto Rico, it's a much more mixed kind of society where you have blood relatives who within 1 or 2 relations look like me and also like my children. So in a lot of ways, when we go out, we're not having to really justify our existence as much, just because we're a unique looking family, less unique than we used to be in the United States. But here it's kind of fun because we look a lot like a lot of different Puerto Rican families. So that's been a lot of fun. And then, there's opportunities to have a business down here as well, which allow us to be a little more efficient with our capital. To answer your question about what is a family consulting firm, so we actually work in agriculture, so agriculture biotechnology. and we work in the regulatory side. So, which is neat because it's a global business. There's agriculture around the world. People are doing innovative things, and we try to help them get access to markets so that they can introduce their products worldwide. So it's been a lot of fun. My father is kind of the main person, so it's been kind of a joy to work with him and a bunch of his colleagues. My sister also works with us as well. So, as anybody who's listening who works in a family business knows, it can be sometimes a bit of a challenge. But by and large, it's been really great, especially with me navigating this process, because I've been able to have been surrounded and working with colleagues who are a little more compassionate, maybe a little less transactional. It's much more of a family atmosphere. So in that way, we were able to pivot. So I feel very grateful and lucky to have that as I went through this process.
Oh, that's really, really cool. Okay. So, and that clears it up for me. I was wondering, like, were you consulting families, but is your family that's doing a consulting firm?
Right.
I mean by that. Okay,
right.
Cool. And is your extended family, your dad, your sister who are working with the business too, is everybody in Puerto Rico? Is it just you and your wife and kids?
They split their time. My wife and I and our kids were down here more because our kids are school aged. So my sister just had a kid, so she'll learn soon enough the need to put roots down. But they're a little bit more snowbirdy, and since we're here at the end of October, we're going to be seeing them soon.
Very cool. Oh, that'll be so fun to be reunited. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing about that. So tell us about your injury. When and how did that happen?
Yeah.
Let's just go ahead.
So I think the injury that happened for me it was February of last year, 2023, and I was training for the half Ironman, which was going to be here in San Juan the next month. And so I've been training for 3, 4, 5 months, and anybody who knows that, cycling, swimming, running, just very busy. And a bunch of friends of mine who are actually from Utah originally, we were all riding together, training. And we're at the end of a long bike ride. And on our way back, we were probably about 20 minutes outside of our place here in the eastern side of Puerto Rico. And what had happened was a little rain shower came over. And if you're familiar at all with Puerto Rico roads, there's a lot of potholes. And what had happened was the water kind of put this real, early morning shine with the reflection of the sun that was coming in afterwards, as well as it kind of obscured the depth of some of the potholes. So I was following a friend of mine, and he noticed last second that we were about to hit a big pothole, and he was able to kind of fall on his side. So he had a lot of abrasions on the side of his body, whereas I was in a lower profile, deeper on the handlebars, so without knowing what was coming. And so when I hit it, it catapulted me kind of rear end over tea kettle, so to speak, and I made impact with the ground. Luckily, I was wearing a helmet, and aside from, really long story short, it was a significant concussion. I hit pretty hard, probably going 25 miles an hour. But I was really lucky that I had my friends with me who were very alert to the situation, were able to move me off the road. Amazingly enough, there's actually video evidence of everything that had happened. So the person in front of me had a camera on the back of his seat post. So while I didn't actually see the actual collision, I was able to get still photographs of me going over my handlebars right before impact. I obviously don't remember anything after that for a good couple minutes. But I'm lucky. I'm grateful for the motorists who stopped and for my friends for getting me out of harm's way.
Yeah, holy cow. So did you go and get treatment right away? Sounds like you knew you had a concussion right away. What was that kind of look like?
According to my friends, we were all sitting there, and my face was bleeding and stuff because my face had dragged on the road. But they said a couple times that I just said, "Guys, I think I have a concussion." And so I said that probably in kind of like a skipping CD kind of situation, like every 2 minutes or so. I think I have a concussion. I kept forgetting what had happened or was not aware of what was going on. I looked at my watch, which was all scraped up, and it said 8 a.m. And for some reason, my mind thought it should be 4 p.m. So it was just a peculiar feeling. About 15, 20 minutes later, my wife came in and got me. We went to the hospital here, and I was treated. And CAT scans, everything, no brain bleeding or anything. So it wasn't, I would say, a very severe brain injury, right? I mean, there was no structural damage, just a classic concussion. And then really what happened after that was, it was just a standard concussion, really. It was, about 2 weeks, the standard recovery time. Had some initial issues with just kind of walking straight. I think probably what happened was some part of my vision was a little off. So it was kind of hard for me to maybe triangulate with my VOR system to know exactly where I was. But, beyond that, it wasn't really anything to write home about. I think the challenge for me was I have comorbid anxiety that stems back to an earthquake I was in 2010 that gave me PTSD. And so what had happened there is some kind of form of PTSD was re-inspired, so to speak. And so that kind of created this anxiety that kind of bubbled on the surface. What's really unique about this, or maybe not unique the more I learn about it, but it felt unique at the time, given the depth that I knew about concussions, they get done after about 2 weeks or 3 weeks or what have you, was I went right back into training after I was kind of cleared from my concussion. I ended up participating in the relay team for the half Ironman, which was a great experience. It allowed me to continue to be a part of it without pushing myself too hard post-recovery. But, the months went on and the initial acute concussion symptoms were gone. And it was only about 6 months later when I'm, of all places, hiking up Aspen Mountain on my 39th birthday that I'm beginning to notice some weird things happening. So again, going back to that idea of point in space with my vision, it was as though suddenly I couldn't see like a specific part on the trail I was hiking. And of course, I was going uphill, I was tired, all those things, but I was in pretty good shape, having trained for marathons. And it kind of freaked me out because suddenly it felt like my visual interface with the world was kind of like, I don't know if it was sliding, maybe is the way to say it. It just felt inexact. So that was the first time that any kind of semblance of something being off kilter had happened, having been so far out of the acute recovery stage. So we can kind of call this the delayed symptoms. And the next week I flew back to Puerto Rico and came back and played some pickup soccer, which is one of my joys here, and headed to soccer ball, not very hard, no big deal. And at night I fell asleep, and maybe 20 minutes later, I woke up feeling very, very dizzy. Like the whole room was spinning, and I had to get on all fours to try to get things to calm down. And part of the reason why I bring up the comorbidity with the anxiety is, of course, your listeners probably know that, anxiety does have a part to play sometimes in PCS. But additionally, the earthquake that I experienced was where I was, it was an 8.0. This was the 8.8 earthquake in Chile. And it was in the middle of the night. So waking up in the middle of the night, feeling disoriented, things moving around, things like that was a challenging experience for me. At that time, that took a good deal amount of therapy and the goodwill of my then girlfriend, future wife, to kind of help me through it. Because you wake up in the middle of the night, you wouldn't really know where you were. It was hard for me to remember what my name was in those moments. This is going back way before the concussion. So if you compare it to that experience of kind of that first real strong delayed PCS experience, it was kind of similar in a way, right? Where you woke up, you didn't know where you were, and things were moving. So I think in that way, maybe that fused what was becoming emergent delayed PCS with anxiety, right? Because it was these kind of PTSD in that moment kind of singed together into making kind of this interesting brew of anxiety and PCS symptoms.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I can see how it makes sense. Such a unique situation to be in, like to have had that previous PTSD experience with the world moving around you. And then that's what you experienced having post-concussion syndrome, and you wake up in the middle of the night. Like I could see how that would definitely, your brain and body would connect those two. So interesting. I'm going to take us back for just a second. When you got medical care initially, did anybody, I don't know what the medical system is like in Puerto Rico, but did anybody warn you, hey, you might have these things, like look for this? Or did they give you any advice on how to deal with a concussion that you remember?
Yeah, so they knew they knew it was a concussion, and I knew it too at that point. By the time I had gotten there, I had more of my wits about me. And the joke I always make is it's probably the best Spanish I've ever spoken for some reason. So getting my bell rung probably helped me there, or maybe I felt that way. But yeah, it was explained to me that this is a concussion. Thankfully, they had mentioned to me the importance of not sitting in a dark room for the next several days and getting up, walking around, not pushing anything. But not sinking away from the world, which was good. I had plenty of scans and things like that. So CT scan came back and thankfully didn't have any brain bleeding or anything. So luckily I was kind of out of dodge, so to speak, and it was more just maintaining symptoms. I also benefited because the person who I rode with from Utah was a occupational therapist as well, and
Oh, really?
a physical therapist, excuse me. And early on, he was working with me, reminding me what to do. So I had a lot of support there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so and you made it sound like initial things kind of resolved on their own. Like you had some symptoms, but they cleared up within that couple weeks. And then it was about 6 months later that you noticed for the first time something off. And then another week after that, that this experience waking up after going to sleep and having that your mind body connect to the previous experience that you'd had. Yeah, what happened next? So continue the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of your listeners can probably relate to this. There was no smoking gun situation here where it was very clear, oh, this was a concussion again, right? It was. So what I was trying to do was I was kind of going through what are the possible things this could be. Maybe it's a vestibular issue. Maybe it's something to do with the concussion. Maybe it's something to do with anxiety. Maybe it's a stroke or something, a brain tumor or something. Because what I was noticing somewhat, maybe a week later was not just balance issues, but also forgetting people's names. Just not being able to remember that person's name. I can see their face, but I can't remember the name. And yeah, it just kind of felt like there for a little while I was starting to tag different bases in terms of symptoms, right? So forgetfulness, memory issues, people's names, some balance issues. And I think in the absence of any clear diagnosis, especially if you have anxiety in general, you begin to kind of catastrophize and think of all the things this could be. Being in Puerto Rico is a wonderful place with really great healthcare, but it doesn't have necessarily great specialist care. So there was no easy, quick consultation. My GP here was fantastic and helped support me. I got MRIs and was able to rule out everything essentially. But at that point, then what you're left with is just kind of this batch of symptoms without any kind of clear diagnosis. I did go back stateside to St. Louis for my sister's wedding that October, met with a physician there, and that person was an ENT, and they suspected it could be vestibular migraine because I guess there's occasionally some little overlap in the symptoms there. And I was then put on an antidepressant to help deal with those symptoms. So, long story short, we know this now after the fact, but I was, I guess, misdiagnosed with that. And so I spent the next several months thinking that I had one condition because ultimately speaking, and I think probably a lot of us on this podcast know this, is the healthcare system that we have today is really a healthcare system of specialists, and a post-concussion syndrome or a brain injury is typically going to present in so many different ways that you're going to be kind of trying to sew together a comprehensive assessment of where you're at by talking to different specialists, but there's no one entity. And we'll get to cognitive effects in a second. There was on my radar no one entity that could sew all of that together. Yes. So it was challenging, right? Because you're kind of suffering in silence a little bit. It's very difficult to explain your symptoms to people. And yeah, again, that the lack of a real smoking gun was concerning.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. So yes, the lack of a smoking gun can be so confusing. And I guess you did have when you headed the soccer ball, but that didn't feel like an injury to you, right? Like I can see how that possibly could have reinstigated problems. I don't know if that's what you've been told, if that's people's assessment of what happened or why they came back when they did. Nobody knows. Is that?
It's funny because when I was hiking that mountain and I had that first little ping of what, some kind of dissonance, visual dissonance, I had been talking about my earthquake experience to a colleague. And you sometimes just kind of wonder, how much of this was hand in hand with, previous traumas, anxieties, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can imagine, right? This lack of a smoking gun is kind of a perfect place for anxiety also to brew, because the one thing, it's one thing, right? If you've broken your leg and people can sign your cast, it's another thing if you can't remember the person's name, or you feel like your balance is off and you start second guessing whether or not you can contribute at work and things like that. So it was kind of a unique situation for the anxiety and the PCS symptoms to kind of play ping pong with each other a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think you listed some of the symptoms that you have. I want to make sure we get a chance to cover, like, if any that you want to make sure people are aware can be related to this. So you mentioned the balance issues and the visual stuff and decreased memory. Anything else that you had that you weren't expecting to be related to this?
No, I don't think so. The thing that's interesting, right, is that a lot of that overlaps, right, with panic attacks and anxiety, right? So, in the idea of trying to figure out why did this happen, and being Sherlock Holmes, was it heading the soccer ball? Was it talking on the hike? It's something like that. It was just it was opaque. It was difficult to figure that out.
And I'm guessing, but was your anxiety worse as well? Like, did you have an increase in anxiety as part of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. What was happening, right, is you want to be social. We have young kids, you want to keep hanging out with friends, but you find yourself avoiding certain situations because it's getting too loud, right? So there's a wonderful Italian restaurant here that we love to go to, but the inside of it's very loud, the acoustics of it, and I could last maybe 10 minutes before having to step out.
And that was anxiety. So that's interesting that you bring this up, because usually I know there is like a social anxiety people often have, like, or just kind of a generalized anxiety about having to go do things and having symptoms come up. But were you feeling like you had to leave because of anxiety specifically, or because you felt overstimulated, the noise sensitivity, light sensitivity, that kind of thing?
It would be the latter, yeah. So it would be the actual sensory sensitivity. So I don't have like a social anxiety. I mean, you probably remember the day we met. Matt and I spent an hour talking to you about things. So
yeah, it was the best.
What it was though was it was just not enough computing bandwidth to sustain a conversation for more than 10 minutes. And so the only way was just to step outside and get away from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, we mentioned this a little bit before as well, but based on what you knew about concussions, what about this experience was surprising to you?
Yeah, so I mean, I played lacrosse in college, and I've been a coach for 15 years in high school. So I've kind of seen the emergence of protocols that have really come in and it's been taken seriously. And I was trained in those protocols. And so anytime I had a student, it was, send them to the trainer. Once there's we knew what we needed to do if there was a bad head injury or something like that on a field. But I never personally felt it. I mean, I don't recall at least ever having a concussion playing contact sports. So I was maybe, I understood it from the outside, but not from the inside, maybe. And even then, the conventional wisdom of a concussion lasting for about 2 weeks, right? Then you're cleared to return to whatever you're doing. I thought I had checked that box. So for it to manifest again, months and months afterwards was very challenging for me to wrap my head around. And it took some research to better understand that. But keep in mind, in the months afterwards, I was convinced it was a vestibular dysfunction as opposed to something that was, more brain connectivity and those kinds of things.
So how did you end up finding out that was not an accurate diagnosis? I'm interested in hearing how that played out.
So this comes to cognitive FX. And the way I kind of came to cognitive FX was, I think, even like a month into all of this, what we would call delayed PCS symptoms, I was already looking around just to see if there was an expert out there. And cognitive FX came up quickly. They obviously have great materials for marketing, and it became clear pretty quickly that this was these were people that were certainly dedicated to solving the problem. I'm really lucky to have a good friend of mine back in St. Louis, where I moved to Puerto Rico from, who's a sleep specialist, a neuroscientist. And he actually called Dr. Fong to talk about their process, their procedures, their research. So I was really lucky to have that additional vetting. And he walked away feeling like it was certainly not going to hurt me to participate. It could only be neutral or beneficial in his mind. But even then, it's not a cheap program. And for the longest time, I kind of felt like, well, let's just wait it out a little bit. Let's just wait it out a little bit. And during that time, I would say that the symptoms kind of intensified slowly but surely in kind of a zigzag kind of way. And it really took until a trip back to Chile in February where my symptoms got really bad and that I realized it was time to really prioritize my health and sign up and come in. So, and it was the cognitive effects. I think it was Andy Clower who said that, what's really happening here isn't a vestibular migraine, it's post-concussion syndrome. So I'm kicking myself for not having gone to cognitive effects sooner, or at least had even the scheduled a call. But this is the nature sometimes of these situations, is you don't have a clear idea of what's going on, and you just kind of have to walk through the underbrush until you stumble across what you need.
Yes. Yes. It is so hard to see that happen. It happens so often. But you're floundering. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand. You've been told something that's not accurate. You don't know that that's not accurate. Like it makes sense. And I think a lot of our default thing is the way we operate is like, well, let's just see if it gets better. And if it doesn't, like the pain point has to be high enough, or the benefit of it has to be so high that we're willing to like do something different than we're normally doing. So yeah, it makes total sense to me that it would play out this way. And I think it happens that way for a lot of people. But I am curious with, like when you came, how long was it between when you heard about it and when you decided to go?
So I heard about it in September, and I didn't actually schedule until February.
Okay. Okay. And then when did you come in? Is that when you came in? You came in February?
I came in April, yeah. I came in as I realized this was time. So I was bouncing around the back of bumpy roads in rural Patagonia, Chile, fishing trip with my dad. We love it. It's a great thing. But it was very challenging for me because it's a brain scramble all day and you're still not quite sure what's going on. So I just said, at the end of the day, I need to finally prioritize this.
Mm. Okay. So what was your experience there like? If you want to share whatever you want to from what you learned, or how it was.
I mean, it was a game changer. It really was. I think that I came in on a Friday and to do my first fMRI scan, and then left and had the weekend I spent with a friend, and came back on Monday. And I think I was a little nervous about what those results might show, right? And I think this is a common theme from a lot of your guests on here, is this: what if they don't see anything? What if it's really bad? It's very easy to kind of catastrophize. And I think ultimately, once I saw the scores that Monday morning, because we had taken it on Friday, it was kind of overwhelming positively to be able to see that on a sheet of paper, because I've spent the last 6 months really not knowing what's going on here. So first of all, just kind of the validation that yes, this is something that's happened, and yes, we can show you what needs to be improved. And by the way, we know what to do. That was obviously number one, just a big relief. Number two, I think, is we can speak about this plenty, but I've never been around more compassionate healthcare providers than the people at Cognitive FX. Because maybe it was because of the situation I was coming into, where I had been through a lot of well-meaning healthcare providers in kind of the conventional insurance-based system. But to come to Cognitive FX, people who know exactly what's going on and can help. I remember, for example, might have been like the second or third day, I was going through cognitive therapy. And for those of you who don't know what that might entail, for me at least, it entailed memorizing several words, doing multiple things simultaneously, like alphabetizing the months of the year, while, all sorts of things, right? And I found myself getting really at the bottom of the barrel cognitively for me. And that's a time where I get nervous and anxious. And so sitting there in the seat, I felt a panic attack coming on, and I felt trusting. I trusted Cognitive FX enough to say, listen, I'm feeling this way right now. And immediately lights were dimmed, and we sat there together and just witnessed that feeling. And then it passed. And that gave me a lot of confidence. A, just not just only in the empathy of the people working there, but B, in myself. Because in previous times when I would feel like I couldn't remember things, I would kind of spiral into a panic attack and say, what is happening to my life, and get depressed. So in a lot of ways, not only was I rewiring my brain, but I was also, I guess, in the same way, rewiring my response to it. So that was obviously really, really key. And the third main great thing about being at Cognitive FX was just the cohort that I was with, speaking with other people who'd been through situations, some of whom had been through much more impactful accidents or situations than myself. But being able to kind of go through this together, struggle together, compare notes on things that worked for us. But again, you kind of go from feeling kind of alone, even in the presence of your family and friends and colleagues who are all compassionate and supportive, but just don't understand what's going on, to suddenly having that crew of people. It was like a whole new part of the world opened up for me. And suddenly I didn't feel alone anymore.
That's a big deal. That is one of the things that I love the most about Cognitive FX is seeing that camaraderie, seeing the people, and not every cohort or people every week. People aren't always driving as much as it did when you guys were there. I just remember your group in particular. I was like, oh man, everybody here is just so supportive and open, and it can be very, very therapeutic. I think just again, yeah, that knowing you're not alone, it's huge.
I mean, shout out to Matt, your previous guest. I mean, we met in the parking lot of the hotel, and very quickly we were talking about things that had happened. And I think everybody from that cohort brought a certain kind of vibe. Some people were very muted. Some people were a little more active. I, being a high school coach, was handing out fist bumps left, right, and center and saying, "We got this." And that made me feel good as well. But yeah, I feel really lucky because my cohort was especially open to sharing the way they were kind of going through things. And you probably were there, I think, when we all decided at the end of on that Friday afternoon that we were all going to keep in touch with the WhatsApp group, and we continue to talk to each other to this day. It's been six months or so now.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. That makes me so happy. I really love that. And for those who are listening, Matt Trawick is the one we're talking about, and I can link the episode that where he shared his story on here as well. So we'll put that in the show notes. And I just want to touch on a couple of the things that you said. I love that you mentioned the empathy of the staff there. It's true. I really do. I have loved working there and seeing the compassion and the empathy of the therapists and everyone who works there. But also that co-regulation piece, I think, is so key. Like your experience with the cognitive therapist, when you felt yourself, starting to lose it, the fact that she took you seriously and you guys were able to like change the environment and do what you needed to do to like allow yourself to calm down, and that she wasn't freaking out about it, right? Like, which is usually, you said you kind of go into the spiral, but knowing that there's somebody who knows what's going on and who knows that you can get out of this. Like, I feel like there's a lot to that. So I think that's really important and really beautiful that you're able to have that experience, because that's evidence to yourself that you can move forward and maybe have that same kind of experience again. You don't have to spiral every time, which if that's always been your experience, then you think that's the only option, right? So not even a cognitive thing. It's not like, oh, I think this is my only option. It's just like your brain and body are like, oh yeah, this is where we're going. But to see that there's another pathway that's possible is a big deal. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I'm curious too, when you were diagnosed with the vestibular migraines and you were given medicine for it, was there any other therapies or any other things that you tried prior to going to CFX to help with that?
So I did do a little bit of, physical therapy, mainly with my friend actually who had ridden with me that day, and that was useful. We did a little Brock string, and because he noticed that my convergence and divergence was almost cartoonish. He took a picture of it. I looked like I looked like my eyes were not tethered together. It was kind of funny. But really, no, I didn't pursue a lot of other things. We did some ENT work, but again, it was kind of this idea, well, let's just medicate it away. As if it's vestibular migraine, let's just reduce the symptoms. And what that did was actually probably antagonize other symptoms more, because there was a antidepressant in there. It just kind of made things a little less consistent, I guess is the way to say it. But no, I mean, so coming to Cognitive FX, I was just blown away by everything because it was like reinventing the wheel every 30 minutes for a new session. It was incredible.
That's awesome. I love it. So how has it been since then? How are you feeling? What things are you still dealing with? Or, I mean, very rarely is it a cure-all immediately. So I would love to hear your experience following and whatever you're up for sharing.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, the walking away from it with a sense of hope was invaluable. There's nothing more precious in this whole experience than that. This understanding of neuroplasticity, that these things, I mean, we went from, I guess it was about 30 years ago, if you had a traumatic brain injury, someone would have told you, well, I mean, let's just try to manage the symptoms and good luck, to now saying, well, this is actually some of the most, I wouldn't say regenerative, but fixable parts of your body, right? And its ability to adapt. So I think, so number one, there was that hope, I think. And for several weeks, it was just very clearly every week was another step up out of symptoms to more normalcy. Over the summer, I did notice that when I did start to drink alcohol again, it antagonized the symptoms. No surprise there. And any kind of coffee, no surprise there, that also antagonized them. And I have to raise my hand and say that I wasn't quite as on top of my homework as I should have been. Part of the reason was because some of the VOR work that I was doing, I noticed that, so you're given, for me, in my situation, you're given a certain piece of paper that you put on the wall with lines, and there's a letter A in the middle of it, and your job is to move your head on certain planes of those lines while looking at that A. And I noticed that the next morning, I usually felt pretty discombobulated, to a point where I kind of felt like maybe I need to avoid doing some of that. But really, the PCS aspect of it has been manageable. I do feel like I would probably benefit from coming back again sometime in the future. Dr. Fong did say originally that I should be coming for 2 weeks, and I only went for one. So there's probably a little more work that could have been done. When I got my exit fMRI scan, I was just inside the mild TBI reading. So I came down nicely from the severe. But there was probably still more work I could have done, but I ran out of time. I had to go back and be with my family. But no, by and large, I think, number one, the frequency has probably been at least cut in half, if not more, for those symptoms. So coming back from Utah, there was a lot of headwinds in me, or a lot of tailwinds in me, excuse me. I just felt like I was making incremental, steady progress. It was so funny, but when you start to have dreams again after not having dreams for a while, that's a pretty remarkable feeling. I hadn't had many dreams in the previous 6 months going to cognitive effects. Afterwards, my dreams are coming back. I noticed that I was able to tolerate busier environments again, louder environments, just visually and hearing wise. I was able to push myself more physically without feeling like I had balance issues. I began to start playing pickup soccer again, which I'd been kind of avoidant of the past. So a number of activities began to come back on my radar, which was great. And certainly for the first 6 weeks, it was, I would say it was just a very steady, linear improvement. And I think starting to drink a little bit of alcohol again probably made things a little more squiggly, I guess, on that line. And just a little bit harder, I guess, to carry successes day to day. And I wasn't also very on top of my homework that Cognitive FX has given me, mainly because some of the VOR exercises I was doing were giving me more symptom recurrences than I felt comfortable with. I'm sure that was part of the situation and part of what I should have been doing, but it made me maybe a little avoidant. But yeah, over the summer, things were great. And by and large, my PCS symptoms are probably maybe half, if not 75% lower than they were 8 or 9 months ago. So it's been a very nice situation. I do look forward to eventually coming back to CFX because I do think there's a little bit more work to do. I tested at the high range of the mild scale, I guess, on my exit fMRI. So I will probably be going back soon and hopefully overlapping so my wife can actually get some skiing in.
Yeah, good. You gotta time things right.
Right. Super happy.
Excellent. I'm curious, when you say the decrease in symptoms, does that include the anxiety? Like, has the anxiety piece decreased as well?
So the anxiety, it's kind of been here and there. What's interesting is that the anxiety that I get sometimes comes from, random situations. So what I've had is panic disorder. So you'll just have some kind of surge of panic. And so then you'll be stuck with some anxiety for a while. And I have been dealing with some anxiety recently, but interestingly enough, PCS symptoms never triggered it, because at this point, after cognitive effects, I knew that there was a solution. There were people who could help me get better. And so it's funny how all that works.
Yeah, it plays in, like, yeah, symptoms play into the mental piece, which plays into the emotion piece, which all of it, yeah, it's all very intertwined. So that's cool that knowing that there was help out there made it so you didn't have a spike of anxiety when you would experience symptoms. That's great. I would love to hear anything that you want to share as far as what was helpful in discovering and loving yourself post concussion, because I think sometimes that can be a tricky thing. Yeah, how did you know who you were and love yourself after dealing with all of this?
Yeah, so I actually got a tattoo recently, but it's a Sanskrit word for self-compassion, and that's been something that's I've been thinking about for a long time getting, and maybe this experience a little bit reminded me that ultimately speaking, I couldn't necessarily say why it had happened or what was going on exactly. All I could do was give myself a little space to have grace for myself and to recognize that I was going through a challenging situation. And I think the main challenge was just not knowing what was going on, but still recognizing that I didn't need to judge myself for feeling confused or feeling overwhelmed sometimes, or stepping away from social engagements or needing to move some work around to some colleagues. And obviously, I'm lucky for that situation that I can do that. But ultimately speaking, it's the reaction to to whatever stimuli, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, or some challenge that you have. That's what really helped me kind of push through that. I would say as well, having a supportive spouse was really critical for me because she was reminding me that none of this was something that I had done intentionally, and she was very understanding, especially with two young kids. And I think the last thing was until I came to CFX, I was just really lucky to have people around me who were caring and understood, even if they didn't know what it felt like, they understood that what I was feeling was legitimate. That helped me feel a little less alone and feel a little bit more integrated with the community, which is so critical in moments like this when it's so easy, so seductive to feel like you're on this little island and irredeemable.
I love that you had people, like you said, who were validating for you, even though they didn't fully understand it. I think that's sometimes, unfortunately, a unique situation. So I'm so grateful that you were able to have that you had good people on your team and who were willing to believe you and what you were experiencing. Is there anything you want to have people be aware of as far as how all of this impacted your family, like as you were suffering through this? What kinds of impacts did it have on the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I haven't spoken about too much, but I'm sure there was a part of her that was worried that I was never going to become the man that she married again. Not that I was a shell of myself, but I was avoidant of a lot of things. And I think she probably was a little worried. My parents were probably a little bit worried that this was going to continue because, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to contribute to my company as much. And I know that's happened with a lot of members of my cohort is struggling with that. But I think the big thing again is self compassion. That message of kind of unconditional friendship with oneself. That's not just for the person who's going through the PCS symptoms themselves, but also the caretakers, because I think it's natural to have a little compassion fatigue, and to give yourself that space to recognize that, put yourself first sometimes, because ultimately your self-compassion is what feeds and generates the compassion for other people. So kind of reminding yourself that this is a difficult moment, but there's a way through it, and no matter what happens, you have to look after yourself as well. That's kind of the big thing, I think. And my wife was good at that because she was supporting at that time myself, kind of struggling through this, and also two young children.
Ah, yeah, that's a lot. Bless her. Yeah, so what advice, I mean, maybe you gave a little bit here, but is there any other advice that you would want to give to the loved ones, people who are supporting someone who's dealing with a concussion? What would you like them to know?
Well, I mean, this presents itself in so many ways, so many different styles, and behaviorally also a lot of different things. Maybe a person is really quick to judge or lashes out. I would just say that I think it's important to get into the science of it and understand these things from more of a kind of a biological perspective or a neuroscientific perspective, rather than just purely why is my spouse or son behaving this way that really hurts my feelings. Because what it does feel like a little bit is it's not like an alien's at the controls up there, but it is just, I think it's a very explainable phenomenon, but maybe just remembering that the person that you knew is in there, that person's dealing with some challenges. But once again, trying to maintain compassion not only for yourself and the burden maybe you're carrying a bit as a caretaker, but also compassion for their situation, even when it's difficult to have that sometimes. But on behalf of everybody in the cohort and everybody who's ever had PCS and has been cared for, thank you for everything that you're doing, and we hope to do the same thing for you if and when you need help.
Mm. I love that you said that. I think yes, I hope people who heard that take that in. I think that's a really an important and beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess also I'm curious if you have any advice, as you've been a coach and you, like you said, you've seen it from a different perspective now than as you were watching your kids. I'm sure you call them your kids. I don't know, your students experience concussions. Do you have any advice for them? Any advice that you'd give to yourself back in the early days, or advice for for kids who are out there playing, or their parents, just things that you want people to know?
Concussion is not a monolith. And certainly there's a lot of conversations about, the general way that you should be reacting to it, but or the way that you'll treat in the acute phase, right? But it's very unique, and it seems to be presenting itself in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. If you break your femur, there's a very conventional way that you heal from that, right? This is, and probably if your listeners are come to this podcast, they're already aware of this, but it's going to present itself in a myriad of different ways. Again, just have that grace for yourself and that compassion to deal with the winding road that is going to be A, the symptoms of this, and then B, the recovery from it. I do have to plug Cognitive FX here. The one thing I wish I would have done months and months beforehand was just go to Cognitive FX to begin with. The challenge, again, of course, is the cost. It's not cheap. But at some point, if you are making investments for your 401k or for your business or whatever, if you really zoom back and think about it, there is literally no greater investment for you than in your health, especially your neurological health. And I feel so grateful. If you think of the history of humans who have had what is now known as post-concussion syndrome, who came through and experienced this in a time when there was no science on neuroplasticity. There was a feeling that you were just a broken toy, and we were going to do the best we could to help you through it, but there was no real way back to the light. I feel so incredibly grateful that I'm alive right now in this time of modern science, where something as relatively straightforward as 5 days of targeted therapy was able to help me even have dreams again. It's remarkable thing. So a certain degree of gratitude goes a long way there.
I love that you're sharing that. I wanted to point that out too. I was like, as I'm just listening to you, I'm like, yes, the gratitude piece makes a huge difference as well. And I love that you have brought it up multiple times. It is incredible what we know now versus just a few years ago. It is vastly different, and the knowledge really is power. It can make such a huge difference. Thank you for sharing all of that. I would love for you to share as well any things that you've found, like tips that that were particularly helpful for you, whether on the mental emotional side or the physical side, that things that were helpful that you think, oh, if somebody's listening, this is new, they're new to all of this, they're just barely discovering all of these things might be related to a concussion. Like, what things might they try that could help calm their system down or calm their mind down, or emotions, anything that you liked that was working for you?
So, life especially, but also having these kinds of symptoms in the absence of maybe like a clear diagnosis is a blank check to speculate and catastrophize and spin up a million different simulations of what it could be. And I think the most important piece of advice to give anybody at any time is just, you are not your next thought. So disconnecting yourself or just observing your thoughts in a way, whether it's through prayer or meditation or being in nature, any of those things, that is for me, the fundamental way you reduce suffering is becoming the observer of those thoughts. And it can sometimes be more challenging when you have brain injury, because, for me, for example, I had a hyperactive chart when I came out of the fMRI. So most people, it seems, are hypoactive, where they have lower function for some reason in different parts of their brain. I had hyper, And so in some ways it's easier said than done to do that. But even just trying to give yourself a little, again, that period of grace, of that little, just a little pause between a thought that you receive and then embracing it. Because you'd be surprised what's available, not just to cognitive effects, but in science and society in general, that will help you through this. The second thing, again, is that it's very clear to remember this. Whenever we feel a certain degree of feeling sick, or something's wrong with us physically or mentally, the propensity is always to feel like you are a person apart from the rest of the world or other people. Mm-hmm. One of the other things to think about too is the internet can be such a powerful tool for good or for bad, in that it, you're invited to think of a million different symptoms of what this could be, or you can self-diagnose, and that doesn't help. What you can do also is look for community, look for people who are also going through these situations as well, or maybe they don't know exactly what's going on or what happened or why it happened. But again, just even that sense of shared connection is such a powerful thing, because when you are feeling scared and nervous, being able to have that communication is key. And I think it's really key as well for us, and with my cohort, with our WhatsApp group, even just being able to kind of check in with each other, see how they're doing. Some people have more challenges than other people, and we're all kind of helping each other out, coaching each other through it.
It is such a powerful thing to have that sense of community, that just remembering that you're not alone. And there are support groups out there. If you haven't gone to CFX, you don't have a cohort, then there are people out there. So please do go look. I think there's a brain injury alliance or some sort of brain injury group in every state. If you're in the United States, and there are things around the world. Just search out a support group, because you are not alone and you are worth fighting for and finding those resources to support you. So I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Anything else that you want to share with us about how you're doing today, what lessons you've learned through this, how you've maintained hope? I'd love to hear any other thoughts here.
I think the hope part was easy. I mean, it was just like seeing friends and family laugh and laughter, those kinds of things. Just a reminder that you are not your diagnosis, or you are not your symptoms, right? These are the things that are happening, the sensations you're feeling are merely packets of energy that are going on, whether it's an emotion that you have or a thought that maybe is intrusive and doesn't feel good to think about. These are all things that are just kind of materializing in your consciousness. And the number one thing we have to try to do is to be able to experience the stimuli, but then give ourselves this little grace moment where we're able to kind of look at that stimuli and decide it's not going to define us. And I think that's true of all sorts of things, whether it's mental health or PCS or whatever we're going through. It's easier to do that when you have supportive people, and I've been very fortunate to have that. But just as easily, I'm happy to talk to anybody who is going through that situation, happy to have a conversation with them, at least to go through my experience and give maybe a path that I took, that maybe they could see themselves in the future finding that path as well. Because you're not alone. And that's the one thing you just have to remind yourself. And that's the beauty of cognitive effects in a way, is it's kind of this lighthouse for this whole group of people who feel let down by the medical system, or they feel like they're not being listened to, or it's almost like they're being gaslit with their symptoms and no one believes them. There's a community out there that's been through this and is ready to support you. And that's not just the cognitive effects, but there's, we're kind of, at the end of the day, the propensity when we feel ill is to carve ourselves out away from the world because we view ourselves as defective or something. And the reality is you should be leaning into the connections you have, not just with the community around you, but even within yourself. So that's the kind of the one thing I hope people take away from this is to try your best to remember that you are not your symptoms, you're not your diagnosis.
Thank you so much. That is a beautiful and a powerful message to put out there. So, and if people do want to contact you, hear more about your story, or just know that they're not alone, how could they do that?
Sure, you can email me. So the first part's easy. Ben, Ben, dot, my last name, which is the hard part, HJELLE @gmail.com. Be happy to receive your message and to chat with you. You're not alone.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your willingness to open up and share this challenging experience with everybody and with the world. I really do think it's going to be helpful for people who hear it, because exactly what you're saying, they're not alone, and knowing other people have had these kinds of experiences can be so very helpful. So thank you for sharing this.
Bethany, I think it should also be said as well, thank you for what you do, because again, this is a conversation that people who are going through these situations, this is a conversation that it's medicine to join this conversation. So being on this program with you, it's been wonderful reconnecting with you again. But it's a real pleasure to be able to continue to help people through this, because the first hurdle is realizing you're not alone, and this podcast is a wonderful way to remind people of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.